Okay, I may or may not have not posted a 50 States of Strange while I was in Colorado, but it's coming right now, and I'm sorry I suck. I did start the painting on a live again and finished it for this episode, but I did get a little bit carried away on accident. So on the live, I painted a lot of the painting. So the actual painting in this video is very minimal. You're actually going to see me talking to you. Today's episode is also mostly true crime. There's not that much like paranormal I'm going to be talking about today, and it's going to be a pretty intense one. So this one is definitely a viewer discretion advised episode. Okay, enough of me blabbing. Today's episode is on Delaware. Let's get into it. All right, first things first, let's do some paranormal. I'm going to talk about Cooch's Bridge first. During the American Revolution, they were delaying British troops so that Washington would have time to escape to Philly. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you should pay attention in your American history class if you're in school, or you might want to refresh it. And during this little skirmish, one of the British soldiers' heads were decapitated because it was shot off. And now, supposedly, you can see this headless soldier walking around on this road. Yeah, apparently headless ghosts are super popular in Delaware, because in Ellendale State Forest, there is another headless ghost that can be seen walking around this area, and a lot of car accidents are reported here as well. So when you're driving, don't lose your head. Wow, I suck. Now, if you're all about that classic haunted house feel, you can go check out Addisea Inn. In this place, there's a whole bunch of spooky crap going down. In room 1, it's reported that the bathtub will shake violently. In room 6, you can hear organ music in the walls. In room 11, there is a ghost of Paul Delaney who worked there. That can be seen often. Footsteps are heard on the roof in the second floor hall, and they could belong to the son of a builder who had fallen off the roof and died while working on the house. So there are other spooky things reported here. Those are just the most popular ones, and there are some other smaller haunting areas in Delaware, but these were the most popular. And my true crime segment is pretty lengthy today, so we're going to get into the true crime. Here is the finished painting. You guys get to stare at a finished painting the whole time I talk about true crime today. So congratulations. Yeah, here it is. Woo. And now enjoy me from a different point in the past. Maha. Okay, I'm going to be talking about Stephen Pinnell, also known as the Route 40 Killer, and he's known as Delaware's first ever serial killer. And I found a ton of information on him, not so much anybody else. So we're focusing all on him today. And yeah, he's terrible. He's got a lot of victims, and everything I'm going to be talking about, there is going to be some disturbing details involved. So if you don't want to listen to this, I will put that timestamp down below. That way you guys can just go ahead and skip past this part if it is not your cup of tea. Otherwise, yeah, let's get into it. I have a bunch of notes that I look through. This notebook is full of all of my 50 States of Strange stuff and a bunch of other random stuff. So I might be glancing down every once in a while. I'm going to try not to. I'm going to try to just like remember most of everything that I took notes on. But if you see me looking down, I'm looking down at this. Okay, I'm not like ignoring you or anything. I take that back. I'm going to be looking at my notes all the time. There's just way too much information and I can't remember it. Sorry. I'm going to start with the victims first in chronological order, and then I'm just going to dive right on into the court case. I didn't take the time to look up like the childhood and everything of Stephen. Just didn't feel like it was necessary. I wanted to focus more on like the terrible stuff that he did and him getting justice, or if you think he got justice, lack thereof, whatever. We're gonna dive into it. I'm also gonna try not to be a complete and utter weirdo while talking, because sometimes I move my hands a lot and I do weird things, because talking, I don't know, talking makes me weird. Our first victim was Shirley Ellis. She was found on November 29th in 1987. She was found by 2 teen boys on Route 40, and she was supposedly on her way to be bringing a meal to some patients because she was a good girl. And the way that they find her is absolutely terrible. I'm about to read the description of that. Fair warning. Shirley was found half naked with her legs spread open. Her feet, however, were bound by her ankles, and there was black duct tape that had been found stuck in her hair. There were ligature marks around her neck, and she had been struck over the head repeatedly, and the autopsy showed that there had been like more extensive torture and mutilation done to her body, but there was no evidence of sexual assault. So, I mean, it's still freaking terrible. Now we are talking about the first serial killer reported in Delaware, so I'm sure to everybody there at this time, them coming across something this brutal was a little bit intense, and I'm sure it caused a lot of chaos and fear in everybody. Unfortunately, finding something this brutal doesn't stop there, because then we have our second victim, who is Catherine DeMoro. I hope I'm pronouncing these names right. I did try to look up like the proper pronunciation, but if I'm messing them up, I'm really sorry. Catherine is found on June 28th, 1988, and she is found in a very similar way to how Shirley's body was found. She did not get found until the following morning on June 29th, however, but she was found naked. Her wrists and ankles were bound. There was duct tape over her mouth, and she had been tortured and mutilated with some kind of like working tools, according to the autopsy. She had also been strangled and bludgeoned, just like Shirley was. But once again, there was no sexual assault. So these crimes so far seem to be just ridiculously violent. But this time, they actually can collect some evidence from Catherine's body, because they find her covered in a weird blue carpet fiber. So they were able to collect that from her. So now we have 2 victims and a little bit of evidence. In August, a woman named Margaret Fenner goes missing, and she is actually not found for a few months, but she ends up becoming important later, because they figure out that she's being tied to some of these other women that have gotten murdered, because there was an eyewitness account saying that they saw her leaving in a blue Ford panel van, and that's like the last time anybody sees Margaret before she goes missing. Now, this is where things start getting intense, and it's like an episode of Criminal Minds. A woman named Renee Tashner, who was on the police force, disguises herself as a sex worker to try to get like more information on all these women going missing, because a lot of these women do have something in common, that they were either doing sex work or had done sex work in the past, and they had like known the area, so there was some ties. So she decides that she's going to go ahead and disguise herself as a sex worker and literally put herself like out as bait. So while she's out here, she's got a line of cars waiting to talk to her, and she notices that there's a blue Ford van that starts driving by like several times within a 20-minute time span. And so she decides that she is going to move to a more secluded area away from where most of the other people are. And then he ends up finally coming up, and they start talking. And I'm going to be looking down a lot for this, because I'm going to be reading some quotes and stuff that she said from this encounter. So she goes up to the van to start talking to him. She describes him as like a white male, and then she says that he was very cold, and quote, "He was different than any other person who stopped for me. It was hard to get into conversation. He wasn't in the moment. He was looking right through me," end quote. and she was actually like running her fingers like in the carpet of the van as she was like talking to him, because she noticed that he had blue carpet in the van. And so she was like, you know, trying to get as much evidence as she could while she was sitting there talking to him. Well, time goes on and they're like talking, and he's trying to get her to come with him, and she keeps like kind of coming up with excuses not to go with him, obviously. And finally he kind of gets like spooked or annoyed or whatever, and he just decides that he's gonna leave. So he leaves, but they do run his plates while she's sitting there talking to him, and they find out that the van is registered to a Stephen Brian Pinnell, who is just your local electrician man doing all of the electricity, and he had no criminal record. And so they just decide that they're going to run the fibers for testing, and that's where they left it that night. If you only knew the amount of takes that I've deleted because I could not say September. Anyway, on September 16th, just a couple days after they do their little stakeout and get the van information and all that, another woman ends up showing up. And yeah, this is what is troubling to me, because it's like, yeah, they didn't have enough probable cause to, you know, like bring him in. He obviously had no record. He wasn't like really doing anything that they could bring him in for at the time. But I'm like, if they would have just brought him in, then they could have avoided this. I just hate this part. I hate this part. The body of Michelle Gordon is found on the banks of the Chesapeake and Delaware Canal, and she was severely beaten. She was beaten to death. And later on, when they run an autopsy, they find that she had been using drugs. So the cause of death was most likely complications because she had been on drugs at the time. And if she wasn't on drugs, it's possible that, I mean, if it was Stephen Pinnell, he would have killed her anyway. But of course, because she had drugs in her system, they just decided to blame the drugs. 3 days later, a woman named Kathleen Meyer goes missing, and during this encounter, there is a witness. An off-duty police officer sees her getting into a blue van and actually writes the plates down, and she gets in the van and leaves, and that's all he does. He just like gets the information and that's it. I'm sorry, but like if I was an off-duty police officer and I knew that there was a guy out there that was picking up these women, I probably would have intervened a little bit more. Like I would have at least actively called it in as like a dispatch and been like, hey, you guys might want to follow this van, like I'm worried. I don't know. That's just me though. Probably the most disturbing part is that Kathleen's body is never found. She's like one of the only victims whose body is never found again. So awesome. So finally, after that point, they get a search warrant approved to search Stephen's van, and they end up bringing him in on just like a traffic violation and holding them so they can search his van. And they find matching fibers to the fibers that were found on Catherine's body and the fibers that Renee had plucked the night that she was talking to him on the street corner. And then they also find blood, duct tape, and they basically just find like an entire kit of random stuff in here. He's got pliers, whip, handcuffs, needles, knives, restraints, and yeah. So obviously they get an arrest warrant and they arrest him on November 29th of 1988, a year after the first victim. Crazy. I'm not gonna lie, reading the court proceedings and like how he handles the situation, I got a little bit heated because he made me mad. And they decided they're going to for sure get him for the murder of Shirley, Catherine, and Michelle. And of course he decides to stay silent about it. Now the way that he talks about everybody in the situation, like you can just tell he's cold and has no remorse for anything he did. As he's describing the situation with Catherine, He says that he had picked her up and paid her $25 for oral sex and then dropped her off joking that she gave him $10 back. And he's described as being super cold with dark eyes the whole time he's in court. It took 8 days for the jurors to review the evidence still. So even with him being a piece of crap, it took them a really long time to actually decide on a conviction for him. Then finally on Thanksgiving, the jury decides to deadlock on the death penalty, but they sentence him to 2 life sentences. However, his attorney then tries to appeal everything for the unconstitutional seizure of the carpet fibers from the van, and so they decide that they're going to, go after him with some different evidence, but the state indicts him for the murders of Michelle and Kathleen Meyer with new evidence. And then when it comes down to this go-round, Pinnell actually asks to proceed without an attorney. Like, he's gonna do it all on his own. What is up with all these weird psycho serial killers wanting to represent themselves? However, he decides to proceed without the attorney, but he asks to be put to death. Like, he wants the death penalty, but he at the same time refuses to plead guilty to the murders. Like, he is just refusing to take responsibility for the deaths, but then he's literally begging them to put him to death for it. It's crazy. Saying all kinds of things, including, quote, "This court has found me guilty on the testimony of witnesses, so I ask that the sentence be death, as said by the state's laws and God's laws. That's all I have to say." End quote. And then on Halloween, the jury finally decides, yeah, we're gonna put him to death. And he has to go in front of a 5-judge court, and this is still, to this day, the only time that a killer represented himself to the Supreme Court and asked for the death penalty. So this whole thing is just so weird. Like, they really should make a movie about this. During this, he still refused to confess to the murders too. And he was talking and referring to himself in third person only. So he argued like in third person and would refer to himself in the third person only. And it was said that he argued like a prosecutor asking for justice against a terrible criminal. And his wife, this guy has a wife. His wife tried to like plead insanity for him basically, and was like trying to get them to not put him to death even though he wanted to be put to death. And so this whole situation is just crazy. Of course, it didn't work. She didn't get what she wanted because, he's gonna die. And then on March 14th of 1992, Stephen Pinnell was put to death. He had no final words, and he still took it to the grave of not confessing to the murders of the women. So, real piece of But yeah, that was our Delaware episode. I hope you guys liked it. My little... that's so bright. I still need to go in and fix this. I'm supposed to go in and add a little bit more of a wood grain tone because I didn't like how bright it was. But oh well. I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. It was a little bit different than the other ones I do. Like I said, I am still probably going to keep doing the whole partial painting done live because I like it. And yeah, now that I'm back home for a little bit, I should be somewhat more consistent on posting this stuff. But I'm really going to try to hunker down. My life has been, I don't even know how to describe things, honestly. I'm just trying to go where I go. I'm going to go where I go. Thank you guys. And I will see you on the next episode. Bye.